News of the failed raid spread like wildfire through the criminal underworld. The Ortega Cartel, once feared and respected, found itself the laughingstock of the region. Javier Ortega, humiliated and enraged, vowed revenge against the blind woman, who had single-handedly decimated his men. But Maria was not one to rest on her laurels. She knew that this was only the beginning of a larger battle, one that would require all of her skills and experience to win. With the help of her loyal family and a network of old military contacts, she began to plan her next move. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the battle-scarred farm, Maria stood on the porch, her sightless eyes gazing out into the distance. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. For she was María Hernández, the most feared Delta Force commander in history, and she would stop at nothing to protect her family and her way of life. The cartel's failed raid had unleashed a sleeping giant, a warrior whose legend was about to grow even larger. And as the criminal world trembled at the mere mention of her name, María Hernández prepared for the battles to come, her unwavering spirit and unmatched skills ready to be put to the ultimate test. In the aftermath of the veiled raid, an eerie calm settled over the Hernández farm. Maria, ever vigilant, knew that this was merely the calm before the storm. The Ortega Cartel was not known for accepting defeat graciously, and she understood that Javier Ortega would stop at nothing to avenge his humiliation. As she sat at the kitchen table, running her fingers over a tactical map of the region, Maria's mind raced with possibilities. She had to stay one step ahead of the cartel, anticipating their every move and devising countermeasures to protect her family and the farm. Her daughter, Isabella, watched in awe as her mother worked, her sightless eyes scanning the map as if she could see every detail. "Mama," Isabella whispered, "how did you learn to fight like that? I never knew you were so..." She struggled to find the right word. Maria smiled softly, reaching out to take her daughter's hand. "I was a soldier, mi amor," she explained, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I fought to protect our country, our way of life, and now I fight to protect our family." Isabella's eyes widened as she processed this revelation. She had always known her mother was strong and capable, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "But why did you never tell us?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and a hint of betrayal. Maria sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her memories. "I wanted to leave that life behind," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could give you and your siblings a normal childhood, free from the shadows of my past. But it seems that the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how hard we try to outrun it." As the days passed, Maria worked tirelessly to fortify the farm and train her family in basic self-defense techniques. She knew that they would need every advantage they could get when the cartel inevitably returned. Her old military contacts proved invaluable during this time, providing her with intel on the cartel's movements and smuggling her the weapons and equipment she needed to mount a proper defense. They respected her too much to question her ability to fight blind, knowing that her skills and instincts were as sharp as ever. Meanwhile, in the dark heart of the Ortega cartel's compound, Javier Ortega seethed with rage. The humiliation of the failed raid burned in his veins like poison, fueling his desire for revenge. He summoned his most trusted lieutenants, including the disgraced Raúl Mendoza, and demanded answers. "How is it possible," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom, "that a blind woman was able to defeat our best men? And not just any blind woman, but a former Delta Force commander?" Raúl, his wrist still in a cast from his encounter with Maria, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We underestimated her, Jefe," he admitted, his eyes downcast. "We thought she would be an easy target, but she fought like a demon. It was like she could see every move we made before we even made it." Javier slammed his fist on the table, causing his lieutenants to flinch. "I don't pay you to make excuses," he growled, his eyes narrowing to slits. "I pay you to get results, and I want results, or I'll find someone who can deliver them." He turned to his tech expert, a wiry man named Diego, who had been busy analyzing the footage from the raid. "What have you found?" Javier demanded, his patience wearing thin. Diego swallowed nervously, his fingers trembling as he brought up a series of images on the screen. "She's using some kind of advanced tactical system," he explained, zooming in on Maria's earpiece and wrist-mounted device. "It looks like military-grade tech, possibly designed for blind soldiers. It gives her real-time spatial awareness and allows her to track movement and sound with incredible precision." Javier leaned back in his chair, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "So the blind mouse has a few tricks up her sleeve," he mused, his eyes glinting with malice. "But even the most advanced technology is no match for the might of the Ortega Cartel. We will crush her and her pathetic family and make an example of them for all to see." He turned to Raúl, his expression hardening. "Gather your men," he ordered, his voice cold and unforgiving. "We strike at dawn, and this time there will be no mercy." As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Maria was already awake and alert, her senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. She had spent the night preparing for the inevitable assault, positioning her family members in strategic locations and setting up a network of traps and defenses. The roar of engines shattered the morning stillness as a convoy of heavily armed vehicles approached the farm, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. Maria's lip curled into a grim smile as she recognized the unmistakable sound of an armored personnel carrier leading the charge. "Positions!" she barked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Her family members sprang into action, taking up their assigned posts and readying their weapons. As the cartel forces poured out of their vehicles, Maria activated her tactical system, the advanced sensors, feeding her a constant stream of data on the enemy's movements and positions. She could see them as clearly as if she had perfect vision, their heat signatures and acoustic footprints painting a vivid picture in her mind. The battle erupted with a deafening cacophony of gunfire and explosions, the cartel's superior numbers and firepower crashing against the iron will and tactical brilliance of Maria and her family. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals, using every trick and tactic in Maria's extensive playbook to even the odds. Maria moved through the chaos like a wraith, her movements fluid and precise, guided by her heightened senses and the real-time data from her tactical system. She neutralized enemy combatants with ruthless efficiency, her every shot and strike finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. But even with all her skill and technology, Maria knew that they were fighting a losing battle. The cartel's forces seemed endless, and for every man she put down, two more seemed to take his place. She could hear the cries of her family members as they fell one by one, their bravery and sacrifice tearing at her heart. Just as all seemed lost, a new sound reached Maria's ears. The thrum of helicopter rotors, followed by the unmistakable crack of sniper rifles. Her old military contacts had come through, deploying a rapid response team to support her in her hour of need. The tide of battle turned as the precision strikes from the sniper team thinned the cartel's ranks, allowing Maria and her remaining family members to regroup and mount a counterattack. They fought with renewed vigor, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they were no longer alone. In the end, the Ortega Cartel's forces lay broken and defeated, their vehicles smoldering husks and their men scattered and demoralized. Javier Ortega, who had watched the battle unfold from a safe distance, felt the icy grip of fear close around his heart as he realized the true extent of Maria's power and the loyalty she commanded. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Maria stood tall among the ruins of her farm, her sightless eyes staring defiantly into the distance. She had lost much in the battle, her home, some of her loved ones, but she had not lost her spirit or her resolve. She knew that this was only the beginning of a long and dangerous road, that the cartel would not rest until they had exacted their revenge. But she also knew that she would not rest either, not until she had brought them to justice and ensured the safety of her family and her community. For she was María Hernández, the most feared Delta Force commander in history, and she had a new mission: to take the fight to the cartel and dismantle their criminal empire piece by piece, no matter the cost. And with her unbreakable will and her matchless skills, she would not stop until the job was done. In the aftermath of the brutal battle, Maria and her surviving family members picked through the ruins of their once thriving farm. The scars of the conflict were evident everywhere, from the bullet-riddled walls to the scorched earth where explosions had torn through the landscape. But even amidst the destruction, there was a sense of grim determination, a resolve to rebuild and fight on. Maria's tactical system had proven invaluable during the battle, allowing her to coordinate her family's defense and strike at the cartel's forces with surgical precision. But she knew that technology alone would not be enough to win the war ahead. She needed allies, resources, and most importantly, information on the cartel's operations and vulnerabilities. Reaching out to her network of military contacts, Maria began to piece together a plan. She knew that the Ortega Cartel's power stemmed from their control over key smuggling routes and their ability to corrupt local officials. To take them down, she would need to strike at the heart of their operation, disrupting their supply lines and exposing their ties to corrupt politicians and law enforcement. The first step was to gather intelligence, and for that, Maria turned to an unlikely source: the local community. For years, the people of the region had lived in fear of the cartel, forced to pay tribute and turn a blind eye to their crimes. But Maria knew that many of them also harbored a deep resentment towards their oppressors, a desire to see them brought to justice. Under the guise of rebuilding efforts, Maria and her family began to reach out to their neighbors, offering support and assistance in exchange for information. Slowly but surely, a network of informants began to take shape, providing Maria with valuable insights into the cartel's movements and operations. One of the most promising leads came from a young man named Miguel, whose family had been forced to work in the cartel's drug fields. Miguel had managed to escape, but not before witnessing firsthand the brutality and cruelty of the Ortega regime. They treat us like animals, he confided to Maria, his eyes haunted by the memories of his ordeal. They force us to work from dawn until dusk, and if anyone tries to resist or escape, they make an example of them. I've seen things, terrible things. Maria listened intently, her heart aching for the young man's suffering. She knew all too well the toll that such trauma could take on the human spirit, having witnessed it firsthand during her time in the military. But she also saw in Miguel a spark of resilience, a determination to fight back against his oppressors. "You're not alone," she assured him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Together, we can put an end to their reign of terror. But I need your help. I need you to be my eyes and ears on the inside." Miguel hesitated for a moment, fear and uncertainty warring in his eyes. But then he nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," he vowed, his voice trembling but resolute. "For my family, for my community, for everyone who has suffered under their rule." With Miguel's help, Maria began to build a network of resistance within the cartel's own ranks. Disgruntled foot soldiers, forced laborers, and even some of the cartel's own victims began to feed her information, providing her with a detailed picture of the Ortega cartel's inner workings. She learned of secret stash houses where the cartel stored their illicit goods, of hidden airstrips where planes laden with cocaine landed under cover of darkness, and of the complex web of bribes and payoffs that kept local officials in the cartel's pocket. Armed with this knowledge, Maria began to plan her next move. She knew that she could not take on the cartel head-on, not with their vast resources and manpower. Instead, she would need to be smart, striking at their weak points and undermining their power from within. Her first target was a remote airstrip that the cartel used to smuggle drugs across the border. Working with a small team of trusted allies, including some of her former Delta Force comrades, Maria launched a daring raid on the facility, destroying the planes and seizing the cargo before the cartel could react. The blow was a devastating one for the Ortega cartel, costing them millions of dollars in lost revenue and damaging their reputation as an untouchable criminal empire. Javier Ortega was furious, his rage only compounded by the knowledge that a blind woman and her ragtag band of rebels had outsmarted him once again. But Maria knew that this was only the beginning. The cartel would retaliate, and they would come at her with everything they had. She needed to stay one step ahead, anticipating their every move and striking where they least expected it. Her next target was a corrupt police chief who had been on the cartel's payroll for years. Using the information provided by her network of informants, Maria orchestrated a sting operation that caught the chief red-handed, accepting a bribe from one of Javier Ortega's top lieutenants. The scandal that followed was a media sensation, with the chief's arrest making headlines across the country. It was a powerful blow to the cartel's influence, exposing the depth of their corruption and eroding public trust in the institutions that were supposed to protect them. But even as she savored this victory, Maria knew that the cartel would not take it lying down. Javier Ortega had put a price on her head, offering a fortune to anyone who could bring him the blind woman who had dared to defy him. Bounty hunters, assassins, and cartel enforcers began to converge on the region, each seeking to claim the prize for themselves. Maria found herself constantly on the move, relying on her wits and her training to stay one step ahead of her pursuers. But even as she fought for her life, Maria never lost sight of her ultimate goal: to bring down the Ortega cartel and free her community from their grip. She continued to strike at their operations, disrupting their supply lines and chipping away at their power and influence. Through it all, her family and her allies stood by her side, their loyalty and courage a constant source of strength and inspiration. Miguel, in particular, proved to be an invaluable asset. His knowledge of the cartel's inner workings and his determination to see them brought to justice, driving him to take ever greater risks on Maria's behalf. Together, they began to turn the tide against the cartel, their victories small but significant. But Maria knew that the biggest battle was yet to come, a final confrontation with Javier Ortega himself that would decide the fate of the entire region. As she prepared for this ultimate test, Maria drew upon every ounce of her training and experience, honing her skills and sharpening her mind for the challenges ahead. She knew that she would need to be at the top of her game, to anticipate every move and counter every threat if she was to emerge victorious. But even in her darkest moments, when the weight of her responsibilities threatened to crush her, Maria found strength in the love and support of her family and friends. They were her reason for fighting, her reason for enduring the pain and the sacrifice, and she would not let them down. As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting long shadows, across the war-torn landscape, Maria stood tall and resolute, her sightless eyes fixed on the future. She knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, that the Ortega cartel would not go down without a fight. But she also knew that she had the strength and the determination to see this through to the end, to bring justice to her community, and to ensure that no one else would ever have to suffer under the cartel's brutal rule. For she was María Hernández, the most feared Delta Force commander in history, and she would not rest until the job was done. As Maria's campaign against the Ortega cartel gained momentum, whispers of her exploits began to spread throughout the region. Tales of the blind woman who fought like a demon, striking fear into the hearts of the cartel's toughest enforcers, became the stuff of legend. To the oppressed and downtrodden, she was a symbol of hope, a beacon of resistance against the dark tide of corruption and violence. But to Javier Ortega, she was a thorn in his side, a persistent threat that needed to be eliminated at all costs. He poured all of his resources into hunting her down, deploying his most ruthless assassins and his most advanced technology to track her every move. Maria knew that she was living on borrowed time, that each day could be her last, but she refused to back down, refused to let fear or doubt cloud her judgment. She had a mission to complete, and she would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Her network of informants continued to grow as more and more people were inspired by her example and joined the fight against the cartel. They came from all walks of life, farmers, shopkeepers, even former cartel members, who had grown disillusioned with the brutality and greed of their leaders. One of the most valuable additions to her team was a young hacker named Lucia, who had grown up in the shadow of the cartel's power. Lucia had lost her parents to cartel violence when she was just a child, and had vowed to use her skills to bring them down. With Lucia's help, Maria was able to penetrate the cartel's digital defenses, hacking into their communications networks and financial systems. She began to unravel the complex web of transactions and shipments that fueled the cartel's operations, piecing together a detailed picture of their supply chains and distribution networks. Armed with this knowledge, Maria launched a series of daring raids on the cartel's key assets, targeting their drug labs, weapons caches, and money laundering operations. Each strike was carefully planned and executed, designed to inflict maximum damage on the cartel's infrastructure while minimizing the risk to innocent civilians. But even as she racked up victory after victory, Maria knew that she was running out of time. Javier Ortega's obsession with her had reached a fever pitch, and he had begun to lash out at anyone he perceived as a threat, including members of his own organization. Rumors began to circulate of a rift within the cartel as some of the younger, more ambitious members began to question Javier's leadership. They saw his fixation on Maria as a weakness, a distraction from the business of making money and expanding their power. Maria saw an opportunity in this discord, a chance to drive a wedge between Javier and his subordinates. She began to feed information to the dissident factions within the cartel, stoking the flames of their discontent and encouraging them to turn against their leader. At the same time, she reached out to the Mexican government, leveraging her military contacts and her growing reputation to secure their support. She knew that she could not take down the cartel alone, that she would need the backing of the authorities if she was to have any chance of success. To her surprise, she found an unlikely ally in the form of a young, idealistic government prosecutor named Diego Morales. Diego had been working to build a case against the Ortega Cartel for years, but had been stymied at every turn by corruption and intimidation. When he heard about Maria's campaign, he saw a chance to finally bring the cartel to justice. He reached out to her through back channels, offering his support and resources in exchange for her help in building an airtight case against Javier Ortega and his top lieutenants. Maria was initially wary of working with the government, knowing all too well the extent of the cartel's influence over the authorities. But she also knew that she needed all the help she could get if she was to have any chance of winning this war. Together, Maria and Diego began to build a coalition of resistance against the cartel, drawing in allies from across the political and social spectrum. They worked tirelessly to gather evidence and testimony, building a case that would stand up in court and expose the true extent of the cartel's crimes. But even as they made progress, the danger continued to mount. Javier Ortega had become increasingly erratic and paranoid, lashing out at anyone he perceived as a threat. He began to purge his own organization of anyone he suspected of disloyalty, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Maria knew that she was running out of time. She needed to strike at the heart of the cartel's power, to cut off the head of the snake before it could strike back. Her opportunity came when she received a tip from one of her informants about a massive shipment of drugs and weapons that was set to be delivered to one of the cartel's main distribution hubs. The shipment was being guarded by some of Javier's most trusted men and was said to be worth millions of dollars. Maria knew that this was her chance to deal a crippling blow to the cartel's operations. She gathered her team and set out to intercept the shipment, determined to seize the contraband and arrest the cartel members responsible. The raid was a masterpiece of tactical planning and execution. Maria and her team struck swiftly and silently, taking the cartel's guards completely by surprise. In a matter of minutes, they had secured the shipment and subdued the cartel members, taking them into custody without a single shot being fired. But even as they celebrated their victory, Maria knew that the real battle was just beginning. Javier Ortega would not take this defeat lying down, and she knew that he would come at her with everything he had. She was right. Within hours of the raid, the cartel launched a brutal counterattack, targeting Maria's family and allies with a wave of violence and intimidation. They bombed her safe houses, kidnapped her informants, and threatened to kill anyone who dared to stand with her. Maria was forced to go deep underground, relying on her wits and her training to stay one step ahead of the cartel's assassins. She knew that she could not let them win, that she had to keep fighting no matter the cost. But even as she struggled to stay alive, she never lost sight of her ultimate goal. She continued to build her case against the cartel, gathering evidence and testimony from every source she could find. And then, just when all seemed lost, she received a break that would change everything. One of Javier Ortega's top lieutenants, a man named Raúl Mendoza, had grown disillusioned with his leader's increasingly erratic behavior. He reached out to Maria through a trusted intermediary, offering to turn state's witness in exchange for protection for himself and his family. It was a risky gambit, but one that Maria knew she had to take. She arranged a meeting with Raúl at a secure location, knowing that if he was telling the truth, his testimony could be the key to bringing down the entire cartel. The meeting was tense and fraught with danger, but in the end, Raúl proved to be true to his word. He provided Maria with a wealth of information about the cartel's operations, including detailed records of their financial transactions and a list of their key players and associates. With this information in hand, Maria knew that she finally had what she needed to take down the Ortega cartel once and for all. She worked closely with Diego Morales to build an airtight case against Javier Ortega and his top lieutenants, using Raúl's testimony and the evidence she had gathered to paint a damning picture of their crimes. And then, on a cool, crisp morning, in early fall, the hammer finally fell. In a coordinated series of raids across the country, Mexican authorities swept up dozens of cartel members and associates, including Javier Ortega himself. The trials that followed were long and contentious, but in the end, justice prevailed. Javier Ortega and his top lieutenants were convicted on multiple counts of drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Maria, it was a bittersweet victory. She had achieved what she set out to do, had brought down the cartel that had terrorized her community for so long. But the cost had been high, and the scars of the battle would never fully heal. As she stood outside the courthouse on the day of the final verdict, surrounded by her family and allies, Maria felt a sense of profound exhaustion and relief wash over her. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be many more battles to fight in the unending war against corruption and injustice. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she had the support and love of her community, and the respect and admiration of people all over the world who had been inspired by her example. And so, with a heavy heart but an unbroken spirit, María Hernández turned her face to the future, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. For she was a warrior, a survivor, and a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed more. People like her. In the aftermath of the Ortega cartel's fall, Maria found herself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero by the media and the public alike. Her story spread like wildfire, inspiring people around the world with her courage, determination, and unwavering commitment to justice. But for Maria, the attention was unwelcome. She had never sought fame or recognition, had only ever wanted to protect her family and her community from the scourge of the cartels. She retreated from the public eye, seeking solace in the quiet moments with her loved ones and the simple pleasures of life on the farm. Yet even as she tried to put the past behind her, Maria knew that her work was far from over. The Ortega Cartel may have been defeated, but there were always others waiting in the wings, ready to fill the void left by their demise. One such group was the Rodriguez Cartel, a ruthless and cunning organization that had been quietly expanding its reach across the country. Led by the enigmatic and charismatic Emilio Rodriguez, they had managed to stay under the radar of the authorities, biding their time and building their strength in the shadows. With the Ortega Cartel out of the way, the Rodriguez Cartel saw an opportunity to seize control of the lucrative drug trade in the region. They began to move aggressively, muscling in on the Ortega's former territory and eliminating anyone who stood in their way. At first, Maria tried to stay out of it. She had fought her battle, had sacrificed so much to bring down the Ortega Cartel. She wanted nothing more than to live out her days in peace, surrounded by the people she loved. But as the violence and corruption began to escalate once again, she knew that she could not stand idly by. The people of her community, the ones she had fought so hard to protect, were once again living in fear, and she could not bear to see them suffer. And so, with a heavy heart but a steely resolve, Maria once again took up the mantle of resistance. She reached out to her old contacts, to the network of informants and allies she had built during her campaign against the Ortega Cartel, and began to gather intelligence on the Rodriguez Cartel's operations. What she found was disturbing. The Rodriguez Cartel was even more sophisticated and ruthless than the Ortega had been, with tentacles that reached into every corner of Mexican society. They had infiltrated the government, the military, and even the media, using bribery, intimidation, and violence to bend the country to their will. But Maria was not deterred. She had faced worse odds before, had taken on enemies that seemed invincible, and emerged victorious. She knew that the key to defeating the Rodriguez Cartel lay in exposing their crimes, in shining a light on the dark corners of their empire and bringing their misdeeds to the attention of the world. To that end, she began to work with a group of brave journalists and activists who had been documenting the cartel's activities. Together, they built a case against the Rodriguez Cartel, gathering evidence of their involvement in drug trafficking, money laundering, and human rights abuses. It was dangerous work, and Maria knew that she was putting herself and her loved ones at risk. The Rodriguez Cartel was not known for its mercy, and they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But Maria was not afraid. She had stared death in the face before, had fought and bled and sacrificed for what she believed in. And she knew that there were things in this world worth fighting for, worth dying for, if necessary. As she delved deeper into the Rodriguez Cartel's operations, Maria began to uncover a web of corruption that went far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The cartel had its hooks in everything, from the police to the courts to the highest levels of government, and they used their influence to bend the law to their will and crush anyone who dared to stand against them. But Maria refused to be intimidated. She continued to gather evidence, to build her case against the cartel piece by piece. She reached out to her contacts in the international community, to human rights organizations and foreign governments that had the power to put pressure on the Mexican authorities to act. And slowly but surely, her efforts began to bear fruit. The evidence she had gathered began to leak out, finding its way into the hands of honest journalists and brave politicians who were willing to take a stand against the cartel. The Rodriguez cartel, sensing the growing threat to their power, lashed out with all the violence and brutality at their command. They targeted Maria and her allies, seeking to silence them before they could do any more damage. But Maria was ready for them. She had anticipated their response, had put in place a network of safe houses and secure communication channels that allowed her to stay one step ahead of the cartel's assassins. And when the cartel finally made their move, launching a coordinated attack on Maria and her team, she was ready for them. With the help of her tactical system and her years of training, she was able to outmaneuver the cartel's forces, turning their own tactics against them and emerging victorious once again. But even as she celebrated her victory, Maria knew that the fight was far from over. The Rodriguez cartel was wounded but not defeated, and they would stop at nothing to hold on to their power. She needed to strike at the heart of the cartel's operations, to take out their top leaders and dismantle their criminal enterprise once and for all. And to do that, she would need to enlist the help of some unlikely allies. One such ally was a former Rodriguez cartel member named Javier Moreno. Javier had grown disillusioned with the cartel's brutal methods and had decided to turn against them, providing Maria with valuable intel on their operations and key personnel. With Javier's help, Maria was able to plan a daring raid on the cartel's main compound, a heavily guarded fortress that served as the nerve center of their criminal empire. It was a risky operation, but one that Maria knew was necessary if they were to have any chance of bringing down the cartel once and for all. On the night of the raid, Maria and her team moved in under cover of darkness, using their tactical skills and high-tech equipment to breach the compound's defenses and take the cartel's guards by surprise. The fighting was intense, with the cartel's forces putting up a fierce resistance. But Maria and her team were relentless, pushing forward through a hail of gunfire and explosions, determined to see their mission through to the end. In the end, it was Maria who confronted Emilio Rodriguez himself, the mastermind behind the cartel's criminal empire. The two engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, with Maria's combat training and tactical system giving her the edge she needed to emerge victorious. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Maria stood over the defeated cartel leader, her chest heaving with exertion, but her spirit unbroken. She had done it, had struck a devastating blow against the Rodriguez cartel and brought their reign of terror to an end. But even as she savored her triumph, Maria knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The Rodriguez cartel may have been defeated, but there would always be others waiting to take their place, other criminal organizations seeking to prey on the vulnerable and the helpless. And so, with a heavy heart but an unbreakable resolve, María Hernández prepared herself for the battles to come. She knew that she could not do it alone, that she would need the help and support of her family, her friends, and all those who believed in the cause of justice and freedom. But she also knew that she had the strength and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead, to keep fighting for what was right no matter the cost. For she was more than just a soldier, more than just a warrior. She was a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world that was all too often shrouded in darkness. And as long as there were people like her, people willing to stand up and fight for what they believed in, there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting its warm glow across the battle-scarred landscape, Maria stood tall and proud, her unseeing eyes fixed on the future. She knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, that there would be many more battles to fight and sacrifices to make. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever lay ahead, ready to face the challenges and the dangers with the same unwavering courage and determination that had carried her this far. For she was María Hernández, the blind warrior, the protector of the innocent and the scourge of the cartels. And as long as she drew breath, she would never stop fighting for what was right, never stop defending those who could not defend themselves. It was a calling, a sacred duty that she had taken up the moment she had first put on the uniform of her country, and it was a duty that she would fulfill to her last breath, no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice. With a final nod of determination, Maria turned to face the rising sun, ready to begin a new day and a new chapter in her unending fight against injustice. The road ahead would be long and hard, but she knew that with courage, determination, and the support of those who believed in her, there was nothing she could not achieve. And so, with a heart full of hope and a spirit full of fire, María Hernández stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead and to keep fighting for a better world, one battle at a time. In the wake of the Rodriguez cartel's downfall, a new era of peace and stability seemed to settle over the region. The people, long oppressed by the ruthless grip of the cartels, began to rebuild their lives and their communities, free from the constant threat of violence and intimidation. For Maria, it was a time of reflection and healing. The battles she had fought, the sacrifices she had made, had left their mark on her body and soul. She knew that the scars would never fully fade, that the memories of the horrors she had witnessed would forever haunt her dreams. But she also knew that she had made a difference, that her actions had helped to bring about a brighter future for her people. And that knowledge gave her the strength to carry on, to keep fighting the good fight, even in the face of adversity. As the weeks turned into months, Maria found herself drawn into the task of rebuilding, of helping her community to heal and move forward. She worked tirelessly to support local businesses, to provide aid and assistance to those who had been most affected by the cartel's reign of terror. She also began to share her story, to speak out about her experiences and the lessons she had learned along the way. She gave interviews to journalists and activists, using her platform to raise awareness about the ongoing struggle against corruption and organized crime. Through it all, she remained humble and grounded, never seeking the spotlight for herself, but always striving to use her influence for the greater good. She knew that her story had the power to inspire others, to give hope to those who had lost everything, and to galvanize a new generation of activists and reformers. As her reputation grew, so too did the demands on her time and energy. She was sought out by politicians and policymakers, by international organizations and human rights groups, all eager to learn from her experiences and to enlist her support in their own battles against injustice. At first, Maria was hesitant to get involved, preferring to focus on the needs of her own community. But as she saw the impact that her words and actions could have on a larger scale, she began to embrace her role as a leader and an advocate. She traveled the country and the world, speaking out against the scourge of drug trafficking and corruption, calling for greater transparency and accountability in government and law enforcement. She met with survivors and victims' families, offering them comfort and support, and working to ensure that their stories were heard. Through it all, she remained true to her roots, never forgetting the humble beginnings from which she had risen. She continued to work the land on her family farm, finding solace and strength in the simple rhythms of planting and harvesting, of nurturing life from the earth. But even as she sought to build a new life for herself and her loved ones, Maria knew that the specter of the cartels still loomed large over the land. Though the Ortega and Rodriguez cartels had been dismantled, new groups were already emerging to take their place, eager to claim a piece of the lucrative drug trade. One such group was the Navarro Cartel, a ruthless and cunning organization that had been quietly expanding its reach across the region. Led by the brilliant and ruthless Elena Navarro, they had managed to avoid the fate of their predecessors by staying one step ahead of the law, always seeming to know where the weak points in the system lay. As Maria began to investigate the Navarro cartel's activities, she quickly realized that she was up against a formidable opponent. Elena Navarro was unlike any cartel leader she had faced before. A woman who combined ruthless ambition with a keen intellect and a talent for strategy. But Maria was not one to back down from a challenge. She knew that the stakes were higher than ever, that the Navarro cartel posed a threat not just to her own community, but to the entire country. And so, with a steely determination and an unwavering sense of purpose, she set out to take them down. The first step was to gather intelligence, to build a picture of the cartel's operations and key players. Maria reached out to her network of contacts, tapping into the vast web of informants and allies she had cultivated over the years. What she uncovered was a complex and far-reaching criminal enterprise with tentacles that stretched from the remote mountain villages of the Sierra Madre to the glittering high-rises of Mexico City. The Navarro cartel had its fingers in everything from drug smuggling and human trafficking to money laundering and political corruption. But the most disturbing revelation was the extent to which the cartel had infiltrated the highest levels of government and law enforcement. Maria discovered evidence of widespread bribery and collusion, of officials turning a blind eye to the cartel's activities in exchange for a share of the profits. She knew that taking on the Navarro cartel would be the biggest challenge she had ever faced, that she would be going up against not just a criminal organization, but the very institutions that were supposed to protect and serve the people. But Maria was not one to shy away from a fight, no matter how daunting the odds. She began to assemble a team of trusted allies, drawing on the skills and expertise of former colleagues from her military days, as well as new recruits from the ranks of the honest and the brave. Together, they began to plan their campaign, mapping out the cartel's weaknesses and vulnerabilities, identifying the key players and the critical nodes in their network. They knew that they would have to be smart and strategic, that they could not afford to make any mistakes. As they put their plan into motion, Maria found herself once again at the center of a storm, caught up in a whirlwind of danger and intrigue. She faced down assassins and corrupt officials, dodged bullets and defused bombs, always staying one step ahead of her enemies. But even as she fought on, she knew that the true battle was not being waged on the streets or in the shadows, but in the hearts and minds of the people. She saw the fear and desperation in the eyes of those she sought to protect, the hopelessness and resignation that had taken root after so many years of violence and oppression. And so, even as she took the fight to the Navarro cartel, Maria also worked to build a movement, to inspire and empower those around her to stand up and fight for their rights and their freedoms. She spoke out against the culture of impunity and corruption that had allowed the cartels to flourish, calling for a new era of transparency and accountability. She reached out to the young and the marginalized, to those who had been left behind by the system, offering them a vision of a better future, a world in which they could live with dignity and purpose. And slowly but surely, she began to see the tide turning, to feel the stirrings of a new hope and a new determination among the people. As the net began to close around the Navarro cartel, Elena Navarro grew increasingly desperate and erratic. She lashed out with all the violence and ruthlessness at her command, unleashing a wave of terror and bloodshed across the country. But Maria and her team were ready for her. They had laid their trap with care and precision, and when the moment came, they sprang into action with all the skill and courage that years of training and experience had given them. In a series of daring raids and sting operations, they took down the cartel's key players one by one, seizing their assets and shutting down their operations. They faced resistance at every turn, but they never wavered in their resolve, driven by a sense of duty and a fierce determination to see justice done. And then, in a final climactic confrontation, Maria came face to face with Elena Navarro herself. The two women, each a force to be reckoned with in her own right, locked in a battle of wills and wits that would determine the fate of a nation. It was a fierce and brutal fight, with no quarter given and no mercy shown. But in the end, it was Maria who emerged victorious. Her unbreakable spirit and her unwavering commitment to justice proving stronger than all the wealth and power that the Navarro cartel could muster. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Maria stood tall and proud, her unseeing eyes fixed on a future that was suddenly bright with possibility. She knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that there would be many more battles to fight and many more obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she had the support and the love of a nation behind her. She had shown the world that one person, no matter how humble their beginnings or how great their challenges, could make a difference, could stand up against the darkness and the chaos and bring about a brighter tomorrow. And so, with a heart full of hope and a spirit full of fire, María Hernández stepped forward into the future, ready to lead her people into a new era of peace, prosperity, and justice. She had been forged in the crucible of war and hardship, tempered by the flames of adversity and sacrifice. But she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever, a beacon of hope and inspiration to all those who looked to her for guidance and leadership. And as she set out on the next stage of her journey, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never stop fighting for what was right, never stop working to build a better world for all. As the years passed, Maria's legend only grew, her name becoming synonymous with courage, integrity, and an unshakable commitment to justice. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for a better tomorrow. And though she would face many more battles and challenges in the years to come, Maria never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people she had sworn to protect, the land she had fought so hard to defend, and the unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty that had carried her through the darkest of days. For she was more than just a warrior or a leader, more than just a symbol of hope and courage. She was a mother, a sister, a friend, and a true daughter of the land, her roots running deep into the soil of her homeland. And it was that connection, that sense of belonging and purpose, that gave her the strength to carry on, to keep fighting even when all seemed lost. She knew that as long as there were people who believed in her, people who looked to her for guidance and inspiration, she could never truly be defeated. And so, with a heart full of love and a spirit full of determination, María Hernández continued on her journey, a shining example of what one person could achieve when they were driven by a sense of duty, a commitment to justice, and an unbreakable bond with the land and the people they called home. In the years that followed the fall of the Navarro cartel, María found herself at the center of a new and unexpected chapter in her life. Her reputation as a fierce and uncompromising warrior had spread far beyond the borders of her homeland, and she soon found herself being sought out by those who hoped to learn from her example and follow in her footsteps. At first, María was hesitant to take on the role of mentor and teacher. She had always been a private person, more comfortable in the heat of battle than in the spotlight of public attention. But as she saw the impact that her story had on those who heard it, the way it inspired them to stand up and fight for what was right, she began to embrace her new calling. She started small, working with local community groups and grassroots organizations to provide training and support to those who were most in need. She taught them the skills she had learned on the battlefield and in the shadows, showing them how to defend themselves and their loved ones against the threats that still lurked in the darkness. But as word of her work spread, María found herself being called upon to take on a larger role. She was invited to speak at conferences and workshops around the world, sharing her insights and experiences with a global audience of activists, policymakers, and change-makers. Through it all, María remained humble and grounded, never losing sight of the simple values that had guided her throughout her life. She spoke of the importance of family and community, of the power of love and compassion to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. She also spoke of the need for vigilance and perseverance, for a constant and unwavering commitment to the fight against injustice and oppression. She knew all too well that the forces of darkness were never truly defeated, that they would always find new ways to emerge and spread their poison. And so, even as she worked to build a brighter future, María never let down her guard. She continued to train and prepare, honing her skills and her mind for the battles that she knew would come. She built a network of trusted allies and partners, people who shared her vision and her values, and who were ready to stand with her in the face of any threat. As the years passed, María's influence only grew. She became a sought-after speaker and consultant, working with governments and organizations around the world to develop new strategies for combating organized crime and corruption. She was invited to testify before international tribunals and commissions, her words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom and experience. But even as she rose to new heights of influence and renown, María never forgot her roots. She remained deeply connected to the land and the people of her homeland, working tirelessly to support the communities that had given her so much. She established a foundation in her name, dedicated to providing education and opportunities to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. She worked with local leaders and activists to build schools and clinics, to provide job training and support for small businesses. And through it all, she remained a fierce and uncompromising advocate for justice, never hesitating to speak out against those who would seek to exploit and oppress the vulnerable. She became a thorn in the side of corrupt politicians and business leaders, a constant reminder of the power of ordinary people to stand up and make a difference. As Maria entered her later years, she began to reflect on the legacy she would leave behind. She knew that her work was far from finished, that there would always be more battles to fight and more challenges to overcome. But she also knew that she had made a difference, that her life had been a testament to the power of courage and conviction. She thought often of the people she had lost along the way, the friends and loved ones who had sacrificed everything in the name of a better tomorrow. She carried their memory with her always, a constant reminder of the high cost of freedom and justice. But she also drew strength from the people she had inspired and empowered, the countless individuals who had taken up the fight in their own ways, big and small. She saw in them the seeds of a brighter future, a world in which the values of compassion and equality would finally triumph over the forces of greed and hatred. And so, as she looked back on her life, Maria felt a sense of peace and purpose wash over her. She knew that her journey had been a long and difficult one, filled with pain and sacrifice and unimaginable hardship. But she also knew that it had been a journey worth taking, a path that had led her to a place of true fulfillment and meaning. In her final years, Maria became a symbol of hope and resilience for people around the world. Her story was told and retold, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of odds. And though she would eventually pass from this world, her legacy lived on, a shining beacon of light in a world that had once seemed so full of darkness. For Maria had shown that one person, no matter how humble their beginnings or how great their challenges, could make a difference, could stand up against the tides of injustice and oppression and forge a path to a better tomorrow. As the news of Maria's passing spread, people from all walks of life came together to mourn her loss and celebrate her life. World leaders and ordinary citizens alike paid tribute to the blind warrior who had become a global icon of courage and compassion. In her hometown, a massive memorial service was held, attended by thousands of people from across the region. They came to honor the woman who had given so much of herself to the cause of justice, who had fought so tirelessly to build a better world for all. As the service came to a close, a hush fell over the crowd. And then, from somewhere in the back, a single voice began to sing. It was a song of hope and resilience, a hymn to the unbreakable spirit of the human heart. Slowly, other voices joined in, until the entire gathering was singing as one. There, voices rose up into the sky, a mighty chorus of love and gratitude for the woman who had touched so many lives. And as the last notes faded away, a sense of peace settled over the crowd. They knew that Maria was gone, but they also knew that her spirit would live on, a constant reminder of the power of one person to make a difference in the world. In the years that followed, Maria's legacy only grew. Her foundation continued, its work providing education and opportunities to countless young people across the country. Her writings and speeches were studied and admired by activists and leaders around the world. a testament to the enduring power of her message. And in the hearts and minds of those who had known her, Maria remained a constant presence, a guiding light in a world that could often seem so dark and uncertain. They drew strength from her memory, from the knowledge that she had faced the greatest of challenges with unwavering courage and resolve. As new generations came of age, they too were inspired by Maria's story. They saw in her a model of what it meant to live a life of purpose and meaning, to dedicate oneself to something greater than oneself. And so, even as the world continued to change and evolve, Maria's legacy endured. Her name became synonymous with the highest ideals of justice and compassion, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope for a better tomorrow. For Maria had shown the world that the human spirit was a force to be reckoned with, that even the greatest of obstacles could be overcome with faith and perseverance. And in doing so, she had left behind a gift that would endure long after she was gone. The gift of hope, the belief that a single person could change the world. As the years turned into decades, Maria's story continued to inspire and uplift people around the globe. Her foundation grew into a powerful force for change, working to address the root causes of poverty and injustice in communities across the country. Young people who had once looked to Maria as a role model now became leaders in their own right, carrying on her work and her vision with passion and dedication. They built schools and clinics, started businesses and social enterprises, and worked tirelessly to create a more just and equitable world. And through it all, Maria's spirit remained a constant presence, a reminder of the power of the human heart to overcome even the greatest of challenges. Her story was told and retold, passed down from one generation to the next as a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience. In the end, Maria's legacy was not just the sum of her accomplishments, impressive though they were. It was something deeper and more profound, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human soul. For in a world that could often seem so full of darkness and despair, Maria had been a shining light, a beacon of hope and possibility. She had shown that even the most unlikely of heroes could rise up and make a difference, that even the greatest of odds could be overcome with courage and conviction. And so, as the world continued to turn, as new challenges and obstacles arose, people drew strength from Maria's memory. They knew that as long as there were those who believed in the power of justice and compassion, as long as there were those who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. For Maria had left behind a legacy that would endure long after she was gone, a legacy of courage and love, of hope and possibility. And in the hearts and minds of all those who had been touched by her story, that legacy would live on forever, a constant reminder of the incredible power of the human spirit to change the world. Years turned into decades, and decades into generations. Yet Maria's legacy endured. Her story became the stuff of legend, a tale passed down from parent to child, from teacher to student. It was a story of hope and resilience, of the indomitable power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of odds. In the small town where Maria had lived and fought, her memory was especially cherished. The people there had seen firsthand the impact of her work, the way she had transformed their community from a place of fear and oppression into a beacon of hope and possibility. They told stories of her bravery and her compassion, of the way she had stood up to the cartels and the corrupt politicians who had once held sway over their lives. They spoke of her as a guardian angel, a protector of the innocent who had watched over them even in death. And as the years passed, the town began to change. The schools and clinics that Maria had helped to build flourished, providing education and healthcare to generations of young people. The businesses and cooperatives that she had supported grew and prospered, creating jobs and opportunities for countless families. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Maria's work was the sense of pride and purpose that had taken root in the hearts of the people. They saw themselves differently now, not as helpless victims of circumstance, but as agents of change, as individuals with the power to shape their own destinies. This sense of empowerment spread far beyond the borders of Maria's hometown. Her story had become a global phenomenon, inspiring people from all walks of life to take up the fight for justice and equality. In cities and villages around the world, people gathered to honor her memory and to carry on her work. They marched in the streets, demanding an end to corruption and oppression. They volunteered in their communities, building schools and hospitals, supporting the vulnerable and the marginalized. And through it all, Maria's spirit remained a constant presence, a guiding light in the darkness. Her words and her deeds had become a touchstone for a new generation of activists and leaders, a reminder of the incredible power of ordinary people to make a difference in the world. One of those leaders was a young woman named Lucia, who had grown up in the shadow of Maria's legacy. Born in the same town where Maria had lived and died, Lucia had been raised on stories of the blind warrior's courage and sacrifice. From a young age, Lucia had known that she wanted to follow in Maria's footsteps, to dedicate her life to the pursuit of justice and equality. She had studied hard, earning scholarships to the best schools in the country, and had quickly risen through the ranks of the social justice movement. Now, as a prominent activist and organizer, Lucia found herself at the forefront of a new chapter in the struggle for a better world. She traveled the globe, speaking out against injustice and oppression, rallying crowds with her fiery rhetoric and unwavering commitment to the cause. But even as she achieved great success and acclaim, Lucia never forgot the lessons she had learned from Maria's example. She knew that true change came not from grand gestures or sweeping proclamations, but from the quiet, persistent work of building community and empowering others. And so, in addition to her high-profile advocacy work, Lucia devoted herself to grassroots organizing and community development. She worked with local leaders and activists to build networks of support and solidarity, to create spaces where people could come together to share their struggles and their hopes. She also recognized the importance of passing on the torch to the next generation, of nurturing and mentoring young people who would carry on the fight long after she was gone. She started a program to train and support emerging leaders, providing them with the skills and resources they needed to make a difference in their communities. Through it all, Lucia remained guided by the values and principles that Maria had, embodied a fierce commitment to justice, an unwavering belief in the power of ordinary people, and a deep, abiding love for her community and her world. As the years passed, Lucia's work began to bear fruit. The networks and movements she had helped to build grew and strengthened, becoming powerful forces for change in their own right. Young people who had once looked to her for guidance and support now became leaders themselves, taking up the mantle. of the struggle with passion and determination. And as Lucia looked back on her life and her work, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. She knew that she had been blessed to have had the opportunity to make a difference, to have played a small part in the great unfolding story of human progress. But she also knew that the work was far from finished, that there would always be more battles to fight and more challenges to overcome. The forces of greed and oppression were strong and persistent, and they would not give up their power without a fight. And yet, as Lucia reflected on the life and legacy of María Hernández, she found herself filled with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. She knew that as long as there were people like María in the world, people who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, no matter the cost, there would always be reason to believe in a better tomorrow. For María had shown the world that the human spirit was a force to be reckoned with, that even the most entrenched systems of power and privilege could be challenged and transformed by the courage and conviction of ordinary people. And so, as Lucia looked to the future, she did so with a sense of excitement and possibility. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be setbacks and obstacles at every turn. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she was part of a great and growing movement of people who were dedicated to building a more just and equitable world. As Lucia traveled the world, sharing her message of hope and resistance, she often found herself thinking of María, of the blind warrior who had started it all. She thought of the sacrifices María had made, of the incredible courage and resilience she had shown in the face of unimaginable adversity, and she drew strength from those memories, from the knowledge that she was part of a long and proud tradition of struggle and resistance. She knew that the work she was doing was not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her and for all those who would come after. In her speeches and her writings, Lucia often invoked María's name, holding her up as an example of what was possible when ordinary people stood together in solidarity and love. She spoke of the power of community, of the incredible strength and resilience that could be found in the bonds of friendship and mutual support. And as she looked out at the faces of those she spoke to, she saw in them the same fire and determination that had burned in María's heart. She saw a generation of young people who were ready to take up the fight, to carry on the work that María had begun so many years ago. In those moments, Lucia felt a sense of hope and possibility that was almost overwhelming. She knew that the challenges they faced were immense, that the forces arrayed against them were powerful and deeply entrenched. But she also knew that they had something that their opponents could never match: the power of the human spirit, the unbreakable bonds of love and solidarity that held them together. As the years passed, Lucia continued to fight, to organize, to build. She faced setbacks and disappointments, moments of despair and doubt. But through it all, she held fast to the lessons she had learned from María, to the values of courage and compassion that had guided her life. And slowly but surely, the world began to change. The movements that Lucia and others had helped to build grew in strength and numbers, becoming a force to be reckoned with on the global stage. Governments and corporations that had once seemed invincible began to falter and fall as people around the world rose up to demand their rights and their dignity. Through it all, María's legacy lived on, a shining beacon of hope in a world that had once seemed so full of darkness, Her story continued to inspire and uplift people around the globe, a reminder of the incredible power of ordinary people to change the course of history. And as Lucia looked back on her own life, she knew that she had been a part of something truly extraordinary. She had helped to carry on the work that Maria had begun, to build a world where justice and compassion could flourish, where every person could live with dignity and purpose. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would always be more work to be done. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she was part of a great and growing movement of people who were dedicated to building a better world for all. As she looked to the future, Lucia felt a sense of excitement and possibility, a deep and abiding faith in the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of odds. She knew that as long as there were people like Maria in the world, people who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, no matter the cost, there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. And so, with a heart full of love and a spirit full of determination, Lucia Hernández continued on her journey, carrying the torch that Maria had passed on to her and lighting the way for generations yet to come. For she knew that the legacy of the blind warrior would live on forever, a testament to the incredible power of one person to change the world, one act of courage and compassion at a time. Lucia's work continued to gain momentum, inspiring people around the world to join the fight for justice and equality. Her tireless efforts to organize and empower communities had a ripple effect, creating a groundswell of support that was impossible to ignore. As the movement grew, so too did the challenges they faced. The forces of oppression and corruption were not content to sit idly by as their power was threatened. They fought back with every tool at their disposal, from propaganda and disinformation to violence and intimidation. But Lucia and her allies were not deterred. They knew that the road to change was never easy, that there would always be obstacles and setbacks along the way. They drew strength from each other, from the bonds of solidarity and mutual support that held them together, and they drew inspiration from the memory of María Hernández, from the incredible example of courage and resilience that she had set. Lucia often found herself thinking back to the stories she had heard as a child, to the tales of the blind warrior who had stood up to the cartels and the corrupt politicians who had given everything she had to protect her people. She remembered the way Maria had never given up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. She remembered the way she had always put the needs of others before her own, the way she had been willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. And in those moments, Lucia found the strength to keep going, to push through the pain and the exhaustion, to keep fighting for the world she knew was possible. As the years passed, Lucia's influence continued to grow. She became a respected leader on the global stage, a powerful voice for change and justice. She was invited to speak at conferences and rallies around the world, to share her vision of a better future with audiences of all backgrounds and beliefs. But even as she achieved great success and acclaim, Lucia never lost touch with her roots. She never forgot the lessons she had learned from Maria, the values of humility and service that had guided her life. She continued to work closely with grassroots organizations and community groups to listen to the needs and concerns of ordinary people. She knew that true change could only come from the bottom up, from the collective power of people working together for a common cause. And she knew that her own success was not just a testament to her own abilities, but to the strength and resilience of the movement she was a part of. She was just one person, one small part of a much larger whole. As the world around them continued to change and evolve, Lucia and her allies faced new challenges and opportunities. The rise of new technologies and global networks had created new possibilities for connection and collaboration, but also new risks and dangers. They saw the way that the same tools that could be used to spread knowledge and build solidarity could also be used to spread hate and division. They saw the way that the algorithms and artificial intelligence that were supposed to make life easier and more efficient could also be used to reinforce existing inequalities and power structures. But they also saw the incredible potential for positive change, for using these new tools and platforms to amplify the voices of the marginalized and the oppressed, to create new forms of resistance and solidarity. Lucia became a leading voice in this new landscape, working to harness the power of technology for the greater good. She helped to build networks of activists and organizers around the world, connecting people across borders and languages, creating a truly global movement for change. She also recognized the importance of education and empowerment, of giving people the tools and knowledge they needed to take control of their own lives and communities. She worked to create programs and initiatives that would help people to navigate the complex and often confusing world of technology, to use it in ways that aligned with their values and beliefs. Through it all, Lucia remained guided by the values and principles that had always driven her work. She knew that the fight for justice and equality was not just about winning individual battles or achieving specific goals, but about fundamentally transforming the way that power and resources were distributed in society. She knew that this would require a long-term commitment, a willingness to keep pushing forward even in the face of setbacks and challenges. And she knew that it would require the support and solidarity of people from all walks of life, from all corners of the globe. As she looked to the future, Lucia saw both hope and uncertainty. She saw the incredible progress that had been made. In recent years, the way that people around the world were standing up and demanding change like never before. But she also saw the forces of reaction and backlash, the way that those in power were clinging to their privilege and resisting any attempt to challenge the status quo. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be times when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she was part of a movement that was larger than any one person or group. And she knew that as long as there were people like María Hernández in the world, people who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, no matter the cost, there would always be reason to hope. As Lucia continued her work, she often found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She thought back to her childhood in the small town where Maria had lived and died, to the stories she had heard and the lessons she had learned. She thought about the way that Maria's legacy had shaped her own life, the way that it had inspired her to dedicate herself to the pursuit of justice and equality. And she thought about the incredible responsibility that came with carrying on that legacy, with being a part of something so much larger than herself. There were times when the weight of that responsibility felt almost too heavy to bear, when the challenges and setbacks seemed overwhelming. But in those moments, Lucia would remember the words that Maria had spoken so many years ago, the words that had become a guiding light for so many in the years since. The struggle for justice is not a sprint, but a marathon, Maria had said. It requires patience, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good, but it is a struggle that we must all be a part of, for the sake of ourselves and for generations yet to come. Those words had stayed with Lucia throughout her life, a constant reminder of the incredible power and potential of ordinary people to change the world. And as she looked around at the faces of those who had joined her in this struggle, at the incredible diversity and strength of the movement she was a part of, she knew that Maria had been right. They were all a part of something so much larger than themselves, a great and noble cause that stretched back generations and would continue long after they were gone. They were the inheritors of a proud tradition of resistance and courage, of standing up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as Lucia looked to the future, she knew that this tradition would continue, that there would always be those who were willing to take up the mantle of leadership and carry on the fight. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be times when the darkness seemed almost too deep to penetrate. But she also knew that there was always reason to hope, that the light of justice and compassion could never be fully extinguished. And she knew that as long as there were people like María Hernández in the world, people who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, no matter the cost, that light would continue to shine. As the sun began to set on another day of struggle and resistance, Lucia took a moment to reflect on all that had been accomplished and all that was yet to come. She thought of the incredible courage and sacrifice of those who had come before her, of the blind warrior who had started it all, and she felt a sense of deep gratitude and humility, a recognition of the incredible privilege and responsibility that came with being a part of this movement. She knew that she was just one small part of a much larger whole, a single link in a chain that stretched back generations and would continue long after she was gone. But she also knew that her role was an important one, that every person had a part to play in the great unfolding story of human progress. And she knew that as long as she stayed true to the values and principles that had always guided her, as long as she kept fighting for what was right, she would never be alone. For she was part of a movement that was larger than any one person or group, a movement that had the power to change the world for the better. And as long as there were people like María Hernández to inspire and guide them, as long as there were those who were willing to stand up and fight for justice, no matter the cost, that movement would never be defeated. With a heart full of hope and a spirit full of determination, Lucia Hernández looked to the future, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. For she knew that the legacy of the blind warrior was a powerful one, a reminder of the incredible potential of ordinary people to make a difference in the world. And she knew that as long as she stayed true to that legacy, as long as she kept fighting for what was right, there was nothing she could not achieve. For the struggle for justice was a noble one, a cause that was worth dedicating one's life to, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The knowledge that one had lived a life of purpose and meaning, that one had made a difference in the world, no matter how small. That was the lesson that María Hernández had taught them all, the lesson that would continue to inspire and guide them for generations to come. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Lucia took a deep breath and looked out at the world before her. It was a world full of challenges and obstacles, of injustice and suffering, but it was also a world full of hope and possibility, a world that was waiting for people like her to step forward and lead the way. And so, with a heart full of love and a spirit full of courage, Lucia Hernandez set out once again on the path of resistance and change. For she knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that it was a road worth traveling, a road that led to a better world for all. Aurora's fingers trembled as she held the ancient scroll, its weathered parchment threatening to crumble beneath her touch. The prophecy's words, written in flowing script that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the hidden chamber, spoke of a convergence she'd never anticipated. The answers she'd sought for so long were finally within her grasp, yet they filled her with an inexplicable dread. "This changes everything," she whispered, her voice echoing off the chamber's stone walls. The torchlight cast dancing shadows across the intricate murals that covered every surface, depicting scenes of battles long forgotten and heroes whose names had been lost to time. Behind her, Marcus shifted uneasily, his hand never straying. Far from the hilt of his sword, "We need to warn the council," he urged. But Aurora shook her head, her eyes never leaving the scroll's mysterious text. The prophecy spoke of 3 keys, each hidden in a different realm, each guarded by forces beyond mortal comprehension. But it was the final passage that made her blood run cold, the warning of a betrayal that would shake the very foundations of their world. The chamber's air grew heavy with the weight of ancient magic, making it difficult to breathe. Dust motes swirled in the torchlight like tiny stars, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Aurora carefully rolled the scroll and secured it in her satchel, knowing that its contents could mean either salvation or destruction for the realms. In the distance, a low rumble shook the ground, causing small stones to cascade from the ceiling. The temple's defenses were weakening, and time was running out. Marcus grabbed Aurora's arm, his urgency evident in his grip. "We need to move. They're getting closer." The pair navigated the twisting corridors of the ancient temple, their footsteps echoing off walls that hadn't felt human presence in centuries. Every shadow seemed to hide potential dangers, and the air grew colder with each step they took toward the surface. Aurora's mind raced with the implications of what they'd discovered. The prophecy had spoken of a guardian, one who walked between worlds, neither fully human nor entirely otherworldly. The description matched the mysterious figure who'd been appearing in her dreams, a being of shadow and light, whose presence both terrified and fascinated her. Now she understood why. They emerged into the forest clearing just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The ancient trees surrounding the temple entrance swayed in an unnatural wind, their leaves whispering secrets in a language long forgotten. Aurora pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to emanate from within. Marcus quickly covered their tracks, using both physical skill and magical concealment to hide any evidence of their presence. The hunters would be searching for them now, their dark magic capable of sensing the disturbance in the temple's ancient wards. They had perhaps hours before they would be discovered. "We should split up," Aurora suggested, but Marcus's expression hardened at the suggestion. "No, the prophecy spoke of unity being our only hope. Divided, we're vulnerable." She knew he was right, but the thought of leading their pursuers directly to the Resistance's hidden sanctuary made her stomach churn. They traveled through the night, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the shadows of the ancient forest. The Moonlight filtered through the canopy above, creating patterns on the forest floor that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by forces beyond their understanding. The scroll in her satchel seemed to pulse with its own energy, a constant reminder of the burden they now carried. The prophecy had spoken of a choice, one that would determine the fate of not just their world, but all worlds connected through the ancient pathways. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on Aurora's shoulders like a physical force. As they approached the outskirts of the Shadowwood, where the trees grew so dense that even daylight struggled to penetrate, Aurora noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of night birds, the rustle of small animals, had gone completely silent. Marcus noticed it too, his hand tightening on his sword hilt. A figure stepped out from behind a massive oak tree, its form seeming to shift between solid and shadow. Aurora's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the being from her dreams. The Guardian, its eyes like pools of liquid silver, fixed upon her with an intensity that made her feel as though it was peering directly into her soul. "You have read the words," it said, its voice neither male nor female, young nor old. "You know what must be done." Aurora nodded, though fear threatened to freeze her in place. The Guardian's presence made the air crackle with ancient power, and even Marcus, usually so stoic, took an involuntary step backward. The Guardian raised its hand, revealing a small crystal that seemed to contain a universe of stars within its facets. "The first key," it explained, "but its power comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Aurora reached for the crystal, but the Guardian pulled it back slightly. "Choose wisely, Dreamwalker. Some prices cannot be undone." Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his fear. "What exactly is this price?" he demanded. The Guardian's form shimpered, its edges becoming less distinct. "To hold a key is to become one with it. The power will change you, reshape you. Some who have held them have lost themselves entirely." Aurora thought of the resistance fighters waiting for their return, of the villages destroyed by the dark forces that sought to control the ancient powers. She thought of her sister, taken by the shadow priests when they were children. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "I accept," she said firmly, extending her hand. The Guardian nodded solemnly and placed the crystal in her palm. The moment it touched her skin, Aurora felt a surge of power unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Images flooded her mind, countless possible futures, paths branching and converging like rivers of time. Marcus caught her as her knees buckled, the intensity of the vision threatening to overwhelm her. Through the chaos of images, one thing became clear: the location of the second key. It lay hidden in the Frost Realm, guarded by creatures of ice and wind, in a castle built from frozen tears. The Guardian's form began to fade, becoming one with the shadows of the forest. "Remember," its voice echoed in their minds, "the keys seek those who are worthy, but worthiness is not measured by power alone. Trust in what you know to be true, not what others would have you believe." As the Guardian's presence faded completely, Aurora struggled to her feet, the crystal now hanging from a chain around her neck. Its power hummed through her body, making her feel both stronger and somehow less substantial, as if part of her was now existing in multiple realities at once. "We need to reach the sanctuary," she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "The others need to know what we've learned." Marcus nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the crystal, concern evident in his expression. He'd seen what holding such power had done to others, how it had corrupted even the purest hearts. They resumed their journey, moving more quickly now despite their exhaustion. The crystal's power seemed to guide them, helping them avoid patrol, routes and areas where dark magic had tainted the land. Aurora could feel it changing her, teaching her secrets of the universe that her mind struggled to comprehend. As dawn approached, they finally caught sight of the mountain range that concealed the Resistance's hidden sanctuary. The peaks stretched toward the sky like ancient guardians, their snow-capped summits lost in the clouds. Somewhere within those mountains lay their allies, unaware of how dramatically their world was about to change. The first rays of sunlight touched the crystal around Aurora's neck, sending rainbow-colored refractions dancing across the forest floor. She touched it gently, feeling its power pulse in response. The prophecy had said that only one who had walked in both light and shadow could unite the three keys, but it hadn't mentioned the cost of such a journey. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, understanding the weight of her burden. Without needing words, they had taken the first step on a path that would either save their world or destroy it completely. The prophecy had been clear about one thing: there would be no middle ground, no compromise between the forces they were about to unleash. Behind them, in the distance, dark clouds began to gather unnaturally fast. The hunters had picked up their trail, their dark magic corrupting everything it touched. They had perhaps an hour before they would need to fight or flee. Aurora squared her shoulders, feeling the crystal's power flow through her. Whatever came next, she knew there was no turning back. The sun rose fully over the horizon, its light catching the crystal and sending a beam of pure energy into the sky. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if recognizing the significance of what had been set in motion. Aurora and Marcus exchanged a look, understanding passing between them without words. Their journey had only just begun, and the hardest choices still lay ahead. The sanctuary's great hall buzzed with urgent whispers as Aurora presented the crystal to the Council of Elders. Torchlight flickered across worried faces, casting long shadows on the ancient stone walls. Elder Thalia, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light, leaned forward to examine the key without touching it. "The prophecy speaks true, then," she murmured, her eyes reflecting the crystal's inner light. "The convergence approaches faster than we anticipated." Around the circular table, other council members shifted uneasily in their seats, the weight of this revelation settling heavily upon their shoulders. Aurora felt the crystal's power surge through her body, responding to the tension in the room. Since accepting its burden, her dreams had become increasingly vivid, filled with visions of paths not yet taken and choices not yet made. The power was changing her just as the Guardian had warned. Elder Kai, the youngest of the council members, stood abruptly. "We cannot ignore the signs any longer. The shadow priests grow bolder by the day, and now this," he gestured toward the crystal. "We must act before they gather their full strength." The mention of the shadow priest sent a chill through the chamber. Reports had been arriving daily of villages falling to their influence, of people disappearing in the night, of ancient sites being desecrated in their search for power. Aurora thought of her sister again, wondering if she would even recognize her after all these years under their control. Marcus, standing guard by the chamber's massive wooden doors, caught Aurora's eye. They both knew what needed to be done. But the cost would be steep. The crystal's power had shown Aurora visions of the Frost Realm, where the second key lay waiting. The journey would be treacherous, and not everyone would survive. The Frost Realm has been sealed for centuries. Elder Thalia reminded them, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. Breaking those seals could release forces we are not prepared to face. She turned to Aurora, her expression grave. The crystal's power may guide you, but it will also mark you for our enemies. A sharp knock at the chamber doors interrupted their discussion. Marcus opened them to admit a breathless messenger, her face pale with urgency. "The Shadow Priests," she gasped. "They've breached the outer wards. Somehow they've found us." The council chamber erupted into action. Elder Kai began invoking protective spells, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. Other council members rushed to activate the sanctuary's ancient defenses, their combined magic making the very air crackle with power. Aurora clutched the crystal, feeling its energy respond to her fear and determination. Through its power, she could sense the dark forces gathering outside the mountain's protective barriers. They were stronger than anything she had encountered before, their magic tainted with an ancient and terrible power. "We need to evacuate." "The lower levels," Marcus ordered, his military training taking over. "Get the children and non-combatants to the emergency passages." He turned to Aurora, his expression torn between duty and concern. "You need to leave now, while you still can. The crystal must be protected at all costs." Elder Thalia pressed a worn, leather-bound book into Aurora's hands. "The journey to the Frost Realm is treacherous, but this may help guide your way. It contains knowledge gathered by those who attempted the crossing before." The old woman's hands trembled slightly. Few returned to share what they learned. The sanctuary shook with the force of magical attacks against its barriers. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling as ancient protective spells fought against the dark magic attempting to breach them. Time was running out. Aurora opened her mouth to protest leaving, but Elder Thalia raised a hand to silence her. "You carry one of the three keys. Without you, all hope of fulfilling the prophecy dies here. We will hold them as long as we can, but you must reach the Frost Realm." The crystal pulsed with power, and suddenly Aurora's mind was filled with a vision. A vast ice palace rising from a landscape of eternal winter, its spires reaching toward a sky where multiple moons hung frozen in perpetual twilight. Within its halls, she saw the second key, its power calling to the crystal she now carried. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a concealed doorway behind the council table. "The old mining tunnels," he explained, as they hurried down a narrow passageway. "They'll lead you to the northern face of the mountain. From there, you'll have to make your way to the Frost Realm's entrance." Behind them, the sounds of battle began to echo through the stone corridors. Spells clashed with devastating force, and voices raised in both attack and defense created a cacophony of chaos. Aurora wanted desperately to turn back, to stand with her people against the darkness, but the crystal's power urged her forward. They emerged into a smaller chamber where several resistance fighters were preparing for battle. Among them stood Lyra, the sanctuary's master of law, already dressed for travel with a pack slung over her shoulder. "I'm coming with you," she announced before Aurora could speak. "The Frost Realm's magic is unlike anything in our world. You'll need my knowledge to survive its challenges." Marcus nodded in approval. "Take the eastern path through the Whispering Woods. The Shadow Priests will expect you to head north directly." He pulled a map from his tunic and pressed it into Lyra's hands. "There's a safe house near the Crystal Falls. Rest there, but not for long." Another explosion rocked the sanctuary, this one closer than the others. The shadow priests were breaking through the outer defenses faster than anyone had anticipated. Aurora could feel their dark magic searching for the crystal's power, trying to lock onto its unique energy signature. "You have to go now," Marcus insisted, checking his weapons. The sounds of fighting were getting closer. "I'll lead a group of fighters west, draw their attention away from your trail." His eyes met Aurora's, and for a moment, all the things they'd never said hung in the air between them. Lyra grabbed Aurora's arm, pulling her toward the tunnel that would lead them to freedom. As they ran, Aurora glanced back one last time to see Marcus charging toward the sounds of battle. His sword gleaming in the torchlight. The crystal grew warm against her skin, almost as if it was trying to comfort her. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly before them, its rough-hewn walls occasionally marked with ancient mining symbols. Lyra led the way, her knowledge of the old passages proving invaluable as they navigated through the darkness. The crystal's light provided enough illumination to avoid the worst obstacles, but they had to move carefully to avoid loose stones that might give away their position. After what felt like hours, they emerged onto a narrow mountain ledge. The night air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the higher peaks. Below them, the forest stretched out like a dark sea, its canopy silvered by moonlight. In the distance, Aurora could see the faint glow of fires, villages burning as the shadow priests extended their reach. "We need to reach the Crystal Falls before dawn," Lyra said, consulting the map Marcus had given her. "The shadow priest's power is weakest in the hours just before sunrise. It's our best chance to cross the open ground without being detected." Aurora nodded, adjusting her pack and touching the crystal for reassurance. Its power had become a constant presence in her mind, showing her glimpses of possible futures and paths not yet taken. Sometimes the visions were helpful, warning of danger ahead. Other times they were confusing, filled with symbols and meanings she couldn't yet understand. As they began their descent down the mountain path, Aurora cast one last look at the sanctuary hidden within the peak behind them. Flashes of magical combat still illuminated the night sky above it, but the battle seemed to be moving deeper into the mountain. She sent up a silent prayer for those they'd left behind, knowing that their sacrifice might be the only reason she and Lyra would reach. The Frost Realm alive! The crystal hummed with energy, reminding her of the Guardian's words about prices that couldn't be undone. Aurora wondered what price she would ultimately pay for the power she now carried, and whether she would be strong enough to bear it when the time came. The prophecy had spoken of choices, but standing on that mountain path, watching her world burn, it felt less like choice and more like destiny. Through the crystal's power, she could sense the second key calling to her from somewhere in the frozen wastes of the Frost Realm. Its song was beautiful and terrible, promising power beyond imagination while warning of the cost such power demanded. Aurora squared her shoulders and began the long descent into the darkness below, knowing that each step took her closer to a confrontation that would either save their world or destroy it completely. The sanctuary's great hall buzzed with urgent whispers as Aurora presented the crystal to the Council of Elders. Torchlight flickered across worried faces, casting long shadows on the ancient stone walls. Elder Thalia, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light, leaned forward to examine the key without touching it. "The prophecy speaks true then," she murmured, her eyes reflecting the crystal's inner light. "The convergence approaches faster than we anticipated." Around the circular table, other council members shifted uneasily in their seats, the weight of this revelation settling heavily upon their shoulders. Aurora felt the crystal's power surge through her body, responding to the tension in the room. Since accepting its burden, her dreams had become increasingly vivid, filled with visions of paths not yet taken and choices not yet made. The power was changing her, just as the Guardian had warned. Elder Kai, the youngest of the council members, stood abruptly. "We cannot ignore the signs any longer. The shadow priests grow bolder by the day, and now this." He gestured toward the crystal. "We must act before they gather their full strength." The mention of the shadow priests sent a chill through the chamber. Reports had been arriving daily of villages falling to their influence, of people disappearing in the night, of ancient sites being desecrated in their search for power. Aurora thought of her sister again, wondering if she would even recognize her after all these years under their control. Marcus, standing guard by the chamber's massive wooden doors, caught Aurora's eye. They both knew what needed to be done, but the cost would be steep. The crystal's power had shown Aurora visions of the Frost Realm, where the second key lay waiting. The journey would be treacherous, and not everyone would survive. "The Frost Realm has been sealed for centuries," Elder Thalia reminded them, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "Breaking those seals could release forces we are not prepared to face." She turned to Aurora, her expression grave. "The crystal's power may guide you, but it will also mark you for our enemies." A sharp knock at the chamber doors interrupted their discussion. Marcus opened them to admit a breathless messenger, her face pale with urgency. "The shadow priests," she gasped. "They've breached the outer wards. Somehow they've found us." The council chamber erupted into action. Elder Kai began invoking protective spells, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. Other council members rushed to activate the sanctuary's ancient defenses, their combined magic making the very air crackle with power. Aurora clutched the crystal, feeling its energy respond to her fear and determination. Through its power, she could sense the dark forces gathering outside the mountain's protective barriers. They were stronger than anything she had encountered before, their magic tainted with an ancient and terrible power. "We need to evacuate the lower levels," Marcus ordered, his military training taking over. "Get the children and non-combatants to the emergency passages." He turned to Aurora, his expression torn between duty and concern. "You need to leave now, while you still can. The crystal must be protected at all costs." Elder Thalia pressed a worn, leather-bound book into Aurora's hands. "The journey to the Frost Realm is treacherous, but this may help guide your way. It contains knowledge gathered by those who attempted the crossing before." The old woman's hands trembled slightly. Few returned to share what they learned. The sanctuary shook with the force of magical attacks against its barriers. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling as ancient protective spells fought against the dark magic attempting to breach them. Time was running out. Aurora opened her mouth to protest leaving, but Elder Thalia raised a hand to silence her. "You carry one of the 3 keys. Without you, all hope of fulfilling the prophecy dies here. We will hold them as long as we can, but you must reach the Frost Realm." The crystal pulsed with power, And suddenly Aurora's mind was filled with a vision. A vast ice palace rising from a landscape of eternal winter, its spires reaching toward a sky where multiple moons hung frozen in perpetual twilight. Within its halls, she saw the second key, its power calling to the crystal she now carried. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a concealed doorway behind the council table. "The old mining tunnels," he explained as they hurried down a narrow passageway. "They'll lead you to the northern face of the mountain. From there, you'll have to make your way to the Frost Realm's entrance." Behind them, the sounds of battle began to echo through the stone corridors. Spells clashed with devastating force, and voices raised in both attack and defense created a cacophony of chaos. Aurora wanted desperately to turn back, to stand with her people against the darkness, but the crystal's power urged her forward. They emerged into a smaller chamber where several resistance fighters were preparing for battle. Among them stood Lyra, the sanctuary's master of law, already dressed for travel with a pack slung over her shoulder. "I'm coming with you," she announced before Aurora could speak. "The Frost Realm's magic is unlike anything in our world. You'll need my knowledge to survive its challenges." Marcus nodded in approval. "Take the eastern path through the Whispering Woods. The Shadow Priests will expect you to head north directly." He pulled a map from his tunic and pressed it into Lyra's hands. "There's a safe house near the Crystal Falls. Rest there, but not for long." Another explosion rocked the sanctuary, this one closer than the others. The Shadow Priests were breaking through the outer defenses faster than anyone had anticipated. Aurora could feel their dark magic searching for the crystal's power, trying to lock onto its unique energy signature. "You have to go now," Marcus insisted, checking his weapons. The sounds of fighting were getting closer. "I'll lead a group of fighters west. Draw their attention away from your trail." His eyes met Aurora's, and for a moment, all the things they'd never said hung in the air between them. Lyra grabbed Aurora's arm, pulling her toward the tunnel that would lead them to freedom. As they ran, Aurora glanced back one last time to see Marcus charging toward the sounds of battle, his sword gleaming in the torchlight. The crystal grew warm against her skin, almost as if it was trying to comfort her. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly before them, its rough-hewn walls occasionally marked with ancient mining symbols. Lyra led the way, her knowledge of the old passages proving invaluable as they navigated through the darkness. The crystal's light provided enough illumination to avoid the worst obstacles, but they had to move carefully to avoid loose stones that might give away their position. After what felt like hours, they emerged onto a narrow mountain ledge. The night air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the higher peaks. Below them, the forest stretched out like a dark sea, its canopy silvered by moonlight. In the distance, Aurora could see the faint glow of fires, villages burning as the Shadow Priests extended their reach. "We need to reach the Crystal Falls before dawn," Lyra said, consulting the map Marcus had given her. "The Shadow Priest's power is weakest in the hours just before sunrise. It's our best chance to cross the open ground without being detected." Aurora nodded, adjusting her pack and touching the crystal for reassurance. Its power had become a constant presence in her mind, showing her glimpses of possible futures and paths not yet taken. Sometimes the visions were helpful, warning of danger ahead. Other times they were confusing, filled with symbols and meanings she couldn't yet understand. As they began their descent down the mountain path, Aurora cast one last look at the sanctuary hidden within the peak behind them. Flashes of magical combat still illuminated the night sky above it, but the battle seemed to be moving deeper into the mountain. She sent up a silent prayer for those they'd left behind, knowing that their sacrifice might be the only reason she and Lyra would reach the Frost Realm alive. The crystal hummed with energy, reminding her of the Guardian's words about prices that couldn't be undone. Aurora wondered what price she would ultimately pay for the power she now carried, and whether she would be strong enough to bear it when the time came. The prophecy had spoken of choices, but standing on that mountain path, watching her world burn, it felt less like choice and more like destiny. Through the crystal's power, she could sense the second key calling to her from somewhere in the frozen wastes of the Frost Realm. Its song was beautiful and terrible, promising power beyond imagination, while warning of the cost such power demanded. Aurora squared her shoulders and began the long descent into the darkness below, knowing that each step took her closer to a confrontation that would either save their world or destroy it completely.